Good morning. Can anybody hear me? You can just say yes. Thank you, Kaylee. All right, I'm a little bit early, so we'll just wait a bit. If you would like, or I would like you to put your name in the chat so I have a record that you were here. And so if you could just type your name in, that would be good. We'll talk a little bit about the lab exam, the midterm grades, and then we'll talk about upcoming exams. Thank you. Again, type your name into the chat so I have a record that you were here. Okay, we're just a minute or two away. Did anyone try the new link? Did that work? Yes, give me a thumbs up. Okay, thank you again. Okay, it took me a couple minutes to figure that out, but not too bad. All right, we're almost there. Okay. 2, 3, 4, 12. Okay, should we have just a few more people? Okay, so before I say something about midterm grades, let me say a little bit about final grades. For final grades, I do apply a curve. I make sure the average score is a middle C and that there are at least some A's in the class. And so there may be a curve. Usually it's not much, but occasionally it's up to 2 or 3 points. And usually then I'll look at people whose grades kind of fall along a borderline and make a decision on whether they remain in the same grade or move up to a higher grade. For midterm grades, I put those in on Wednesday. I don't know if you've got them yet, but they should come in roar. Midterm grade score, there was no curve applied. It did not include the assignments, so it just included exams, lab quizzes, chapter quizzes, and attendance at the Zoom meetings. And so those things were in there. And there was no curve applied, no rounding up. And so that your grade reflects that. For those of you that got lower midterm grades, often it's usually missing quizzes, missing forums, missing Zoom meetings, things like that, or missing an exam. Most of the grade remains to be determined. At the end of the semester, there'll be about 1,000 points. Right now we have, I think, 380 was what the grade was based on. So about 2/3 of the exam remains to be earned yet. Also, your lab exam scores are available in Moodle, and I will return those to you next week. And there'll be a key posted next week. Lab exams are a different type of exams. You know, it's an entirely fill-in-the-blank exam, mostly about name this, name that, kind of a recognition and recall exercise, knowing basic anatomy or basic concepts about anatomy. You know, for that, I will, when you get it back, you'll notice that some scores or some answers are just marked wrong. And other answers might be not correct, but they're close. And so I mark those weak, and those would be half off. With lab exams, again, because it's recognition and recall, often I'm I don't want to say an easy grader, but I recognize that there be times where it's hard to remember those things. Don't leave answers blank. Guess. Your first guess is potentially right, and there's no penalty for guessing. And so that's, you know, my thing there. So so when those things come, you can look at them and ask me about them next week. We will meet in lab next week. Like next week, we'll look at the cadaver, the muscles of the cadaver. We'll look at some of the models, and we'll look at muscle tissue. So some of that stuff is coming next week. All right, let's look at, I'll share and we'll look at I'll share screen and we'll look at the schedule just to see what's going on. Let's see, today is it's October 16th. So that was the week of October 12th. So we're working on the muscles. And today will be exam 2. That will cover chapters 5, 6, 9, 10, and 11. Kind of. Mostly it's chapters 5, 6, and 10. Those are the 3 primary chapters, with a little bit of chapter 9 and maybe a little bit of chapter 11, but not a whole lot. I'm not going to ask you to name any individual bone. I will ask you something about the anatomy of long bones. I'm not going to ask you to name any individual joint or joint structures, but I will ask you about types of joints, joint functions, things like that. And in chapter 11, I wouldn't ask you about to identify any individual muscles, but I'll ask you about muscles as organs and muscles as groups. And so that exam is today or tomorrow. So it should open this afternoon and it will close tomorrow evening. Okay. And since we're kind of looking at it there, the rest of the semester, which covers another 5 chapters, that's going to be on the nervous system. So you can kind of see the nervous system coming up. So that's even more complex than the organ systems we're talking about. We're going to take them a bit at a time. And so we'll have a nerve and nerve tissue, anatomy of nervous system, somatic, autonomic nervous system, and then the neurological exam. So really detailed stuff coming up. Okay. Anybody have any questions about that so far? Okay. So exam opens later today. Okay, exam 2, it will close tomorrow night. All right.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
It's about our laboratory book.
Yeah.
Mine stops at chapter 9 and then jumps to chapter 17.
Right. There's nothing on the muscles. So I'll have some muscle handouts for you next week in lecture. So we've, as faculty, there's four faculty members in biology, and we all teach anatomy and physiology. And one of our goals is to hold down the price of the course. And so we use the open source textbook, and there is not an open source lab manual. So we looked at various lab manuals that we could purchase. And so the lab manual you got, which I think was about $100, is that right?
Yeah, close to.
Close to $100. So prior to this switch to the textbook that we have, we purchased the commercially available textbook and lab manual, I think from Pearson. And the textbook was in the neighborhood of $360, and then that lab manual was pushing $210. Plus there was an additional fee for the online testing stuff. And we just decided that was too much. And so we went to the open source book and the lab manual. To save money, we went to a black and white, and then a selection of chapters, and we can only select so many chapters. And the black and white muscle stuff that we got, we decided that just wasn't that good. We used to do cat dissection, which we've moved away from because we couldn't get the cats, and we're doing other things. So it's handouts. Okay. That's the short story. So you'll get them tomorrow. Some of them you've already got, or you'll get them next week. So okay.
Okay.
So, and there, you know, the other thing, Timber, is there's lots of stuff online. There's good quality pictures online, and that was part of our issue. Is like, we're, you know, you guys are. I don't want you to pay $200 to get color pictures in a lab manual when you can get that same illustration online for nothing. And that's color printing is expensive, and there's now lots of information, lots of good pictures, labeled pictures available online. And so it just didn't make sense to do that to you. You know, that's where we're at. Okay. All right. Let's, I know it's posted online, but let's go over some of the review stuff. And so I'm going to go to the review. Let's see there. So do you see study tips? Spend lots of time. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So again, these are lots of things to memorize, lots of complex stuff. Again, the more time you spend, the better. And the more active methods that involve writing, the more likely you'll do well on the test. So I repeat this over and over because it pays to know that if you put in lots of effort in the right ways, it will pay off. Okay, and so so that's, you know, something that I repeat over and over. I'm sorry. Okay, let's go to the next page. Whoops. Okay, primarily chapters 5, 6, and 10 are the primary chapters. Concentrate on the general functions of each system. There's almost always a question on what are the functions of the skin, which of these is not a function of the skin, or the bones, or something like that. Then on physiology. So most of the anatomy stuff I'm asking in lab. So there's more, the physiology things are the things that I have to ask about in lecture. So that includes things on homeostasis, on functional disorders, things like on development. Okay, you know, there's not time to read that stuff again. Okay, but you could read all the chapter summaries again. That would be a good thing to do. You can look at bold terms and headings. Those are good things to do. You know, you can look at the keywords on the Moodle files, on the PowerPoint files, and certainly look over your old quizzes. I reuse questions from some of the quizzes. Not some of your questions will be new. There is a practice exam available. After I'm done with this, I will post the key. There are also the essay questions available. You'll randomly be assigned 2 of those 4 questions. So those things are all available. You should look at them and be fairly well prepared. You know, so this kind of, each chapter has this general functions kind of page somewhere in the PowerPoint or in the movie presentation. You should look at that. That's usually also in the textbook at the beginning of each chapter. That's a good overview of kind of the physiology often. And so like for the skin, you know, this is where we talk about skin color, UV light, and it's also skin cancer kind of leads us there. It talks about temperature regulation. Those are the big physiology topics under the skin. You won't have labeling. I shouldn't say that. There may be a small amount of labeling assigned questions, but it's likely that there might be questions that would ask you about, you know, the function of this gland or that gland, or the arrangement of cells in a hair follicle. Those types of things might be there. There will likely be questions on skin color. That's a big topic, and skin color protects us against ultraviolet light that can damage DNA and cause skin cancer. Ultraviolet light also ages the skin. It's the primary thing that ages the skin is UV light. And so melanin protects us from that, Not perfectly, but a fair bit. And so that's important to know. Then the temperature homeostasis. Okay, of course, the eccrine or merocrine sweat glands produce a watery fluid that, when it evaporates, carries a lot of heat away from the skin. But in addition to that, you have the distribution of blood flow. And blood can be directed to flow near the surface of the skin. So that increases heat loss. And when we're very warm, we do that. And then if we're cold, we direct blood away from the surface of the skin and we let the skin temperature fall, and that reduces heat loss. And so that's under control of the brain. We also can control heat generation to a certain extent with the muscles, bless you, and things like that. Okay, I almost certainly ask about skin cancer. Okay, skin cancers. I gave you a nice little section on skin cancer. Okay, what causes skin cancer is ultraviolet light damaging DNA in skin cells. If that DNA is damaged and that damage occurs to some of the genes that control mitosis, okay, the cells might start undergoing mitosis too often. That's skin cancer. Okay, skin cancers are the most common cause of are the most common type of cancer. Okay, by far. Fortunately, most skin cancers are these basal cell carcinomas and squamous cell carcinomas. Okay, those are less likely to spread deep. They're slow growing and can be easily removed. Those are due to chronic sunlight exposure. And so they typically occur in certain parts of the body on people who are outside a lot. Melanomas are a little bit different. Melanomas are much less common, but much more serious. They're more likely to spread, and they particularly spread deeply relatively quick. And so if they're not caught early, they are likely to lead to tumors in other places. They still have a fairly good prognosis. Most likely you're going to survive them, but they cause a significant number of deaths. And unlike basal cell carcinomas, these are likely to start in a mole. Moles or cells are kind of abnormal anyway, and these are more likely related to severe sunburns. So they can occur in young adults. And so, but treatable if caught early. And so this is all about DNA damage. And again, sunlight is the cause. Some of us are more susceptible. Okay, if you have light skin, if you have blue eyes, if you have blonde hair, you are more susceptible. That doesn't mean you've got any cause. It just means you have less melanin, and so you have a less protection. If you have dark colored skin, you're more protected. That doesn't mean you're immune. You're more you have more resistance, but it's still a possibility for you, but it's going to take more exposure to get it. Okay, so again, that's kind of how we do it. We're looking at general functions. So here for the skeletal system, support, protection, movement, storage of calcium, homeostasis of calcium, and then blood cell production. There might be a little bit on the structure of a long bone. There won't be any identification of bones. And you should kind of know the function of these different regions. And so what happens at the periosteum, what's going on at the epiphyseal disc, what happens in red bone marrow, what happens in yellow bone marrow, those kind of things. Let's go here. There's also an important component of development here, how bones form and grow and change over time. And so there's the cartilage bones that form in the embryo as cartilage models, and then osteoblasts invade that and in specific places and start depositing bone. Okay, these bones can continue to grow in length as long as there's some cartilage left. And so these include almost all your long bones. The other type of bones are membranous bones. These would be like the bones, the large bones of your cranium. Your clavicle is a bone like this, and I think parts of the sternum. These bones form underneath the skin in fibrous connective tissue. Again, osteoblasts invade this, but here they deposit, first they deposit trabeculae, spongy bone, and then they make a compact bone around that. And this happens in one region and the growth occurs at the edges. And so here, again, you have growth in a specific place where there's still fibrous connective tissue. And so the bones can be almost completely grown together, but they're still growing. Growth in width, I should mention, and fracture repair are kind of additional topics that go in here. Bones, osteoblasts, you have osteoblasts your whole life. They can deposit bone your whole life. And they do that if there's extra calcium, if there's stress on the bone, if there's a fracture, osteoblasts will go towards that area and start depositing bone. And so it's not that you can't build bone, but you can't grow in length after a certain time. Here in the skeletal system, the biggest topic is calcium homeostasis. And you have these two hormones, parathyroid hormone and calcitonin, that are regulating the balance of calcium in the blood. Okay, and so, and three organs kind of control calcium levels in the blood. What's happening in the bone with calcium storage or release, what's happening in the intestine with calcium uptake, and what's happening in the kidney with calcium loss. Okay, and those are the three things affecting calcium in the blood. I always remember calcitonin, and that calcitonin puts calcium into the bone. And so that means it's decreasing calcium in the blood. And at the same time, it will decrease calcium in the blood by affecting the intestine so that it's less able to take up calcium, and the kidney will be more able to excrete it. Then parathyroid hormone does the opposite. It's promoting calcium storage or calcium release into the blood. And it does this by taking calcium out of bone and improving calcium absorption in the intestine and decreasing the loss. So these are typical homeostasis, negative feedback type mechanisms. Okay, in older adults, this mechanism goes wrong and produces osteoporosis. This is a major problem with calcium homeostasis, where the calcium loss has exceeded gain for a prolonged period of time. Bones lose their strength, and primarily they lose spongy bone at first in the trabeculae, and so the bone will have its shape, but it'll become less and less strong, more prone to fracture. And there are typical fractures you find. Here you find these compression fractures in the vertebrae, that's one thing. Wrist fractures on falling, hip fractures, and this is because calcium has been continually taken out of the bone. Okay, and the risk factors, the primary risk factor is age and gender. And that's because osteoblasts become less active as we age. Our growth hormone levels decrease. That affects osteoblasts. Our sex hormones decrease. And for women, they have an abrupt decrease in sex hormones at menopause. And so then it's a bigger issue for them. But if you've had good calcium in your diet for a long time and you've maintained a healthy weight above, not anorexia, but healthy weight or above average weight and are physically active, it's likely you have enough calcium so you're never going to do this. But if you're mostly sedentary, have low calcium in your diet, if you do things that interfere with calcium absorption, like smoking or alcohol consumption, or lots of tea and coffee, those things can interfere with calcium consumptions, and so your bones might be less dense, and then you develop osteoporosis later. Okay, let's see here. So again, for joints, I'm not going to ask you to tell me the parts of the hip or anything like that, but I will ask you to be able to identify these classes of joints and what they do. So there are fibrous joints like sutures, or the gomphosis there, the periodontal ligament. Syndesmosis is a ligament between two bones that shows a little movement. So like the radial ulnar syndesmosis is a ligament that holds the two bones of the lower arm together. They still rotate around each other, but there's not that much movement there. Cartilage joints would be like the pubic symphysis between the two pubic bones of the pelvis, or the synchondrosis. That's the joints that hold the ribs to the sternum, or another good example of that would be an epiphyseal disc is a synchondrosis. And then synovial joints have complex structures and are totally movable. And so all synovial joints will have articular cartilage, will have a fibrous capsule lined by a membrane that secretes fluid into the synovial cavity. And so there's a cavity there. And so smooth movement, shock absorption, those are the types of things we get with that. With joints, we all think they permit voluntary movement, and that's true of synovial joints. But one of the big functions of joints is that they permit growth. And so they hold structures together, but allow the two structures to grow independently. And so like a suture, the function of a suture is not to move so much, but to permit growth. And then during the birth process, the suture is very large, and so it can permit shape changes. And so, you have that. And so like an epiphyseal disc is a cartilage plate inside a growing long bone. It permits growth. Okay. There's not going to be too much else about this other than arthritis. Arthritis, here this is a disorder of synovial joints that affects lots of Americans. Again, for osteoarthritis, that's the most common type. Its age is the most significant factor, and here injury is important. Overuse is important. So if you've had a series of knee injuries, that knee is more prone to arthritis. And arthritis is an inflammation of the joint. The joint is painful and swollen and difficult to move. It's often that you get extra bone deposited along kind of worn cartilage surfaces. So you can see these. And these cartilage or bone deposits are painful because they'll rub and they'll make the movement irregular. There's other types of arthritis caused by autoimmunity and infections, but focus on osteoarthritis. Okay, muscles. Again, a general function, movement, posture, move air into the lungs, produce heat, communication, heart and organ function. Here, there's a really focus on the cells and how the cells work. So cells have specialized structures. Okay, most importantly, the myofibrils, the bundles of protein, actin and myosin that contract. Then these bundles are wrapped by a sarcoplasmic reticulum that sits near transverse tubules. Okay, and so those are the primary things. You have these very specialized cells. The cells, to get them active in skeletal muscle cells, we have to have a signal from a neuron. And so the neuron joins the muscle cell at the neuromuscular junction or synapse, where it releases a chemical signal, acetylcholine, that works its way over from the end of the neuron, the axon, and it binds to a receptor. That receptor is a gated ion channel, and so you get this electrical change, which is an action potential or depolarization. Okay, in the excitation coupling, this thing is going to spread from that neuromuscular junction all across the membrane of the cell into the transverse tubules, and there it will cause the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium into the myofibril. Okay, calcium triggers the interaction between actin and myosin. When calcium winds up there, it binds to troponin, and that shifts tropomyosin so that binding sites on actin are exposed. Then the myosin has heads that can reach over and grab the actin and pull it past. And then when ATP is present, this cycle repeats. As long as ATP and calcium are present, the muscle gets shorter and shorter. Okay, you need calcium to do this, so the cell can pull calcium out, and then the whole thing will stop. And that's muscle contraction. That's the sliding filament theory of muscle contraction. Okay, the ATP can be produced two ways: an aerobic way, which is the slow oxidative fibers use. They have lots of mitochondria, they have blood vessels, they have a pigment that stores oxygen because they need oxygen. And so these muscles appear red. Okay, they can use glucose or fat as a source of energy. Anaerobic muscles are faster. Okay, they're the fast glycolytic fibers. They have very fast myosin, and they produce ATP really fast, but they also produce a kind of toxic waste product, lactic acid, and that leads to muscle fatigue. These cells don't need oxygen. They can use only glucose, so they store glucose. They don't have myoglobin. They don't have a particularly good blood supply. They will appear whitish. So it's white fibers. Okay, then there was a little bit this week as muscles as organs. Muscles have lots of connective tissue, neurons, blood vessels. The connective tissues form the ends of the muscles. These are the tendons, the insertions into the bone. The part that remains stable when the muscle contracts is the origin. The part that moves is the insertion. Okay, the thickest part of the muscle, that's where all the skeletal muscle is, that's the belly. And the cross-sectional area determines how strong the muscle is. And that will enlarge during a contraction. Okay. Muscles as a group can respond in a variety of strengths. So if there's a single message from a neuron, you'll get a very slight contraction. If the neuron sends repeated messages, the contraction will be stronger and longer. This is the staircase or trap effect. And then the maximal contraction is a tetanic contraction. Okay, this whole thing is called frequency summation, where you have a series of nerve impulses. Muscles also have more than one motor unit for large muscles, and so you can have the muscle contract only by activating a few motor units, or you could activate many and get a stronger contraction. Here I talked a little bit, here the disorders aren't as big an issue. There's two that I talked about: a genetic problem where there's a defect in the proteins that link the actin and myosin to the sarcomere, and so that they can't contract the cell and the cells break down. And then myasthenia gravis is an autoimmunity where the body starts attacking the receptors to acetylcholine, and so then the muscle can't be activated. Okay. All right, that's a lot. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. All right. Okay, so, well, I'm about a half hour, so I'm going to stop there. Remember, the lecture exam is today. Put your name in the chat already if you haven't. And we'll see you next week in lab. I will have your lab exams for you. I'll have some muscle handouts. We'll look at the cadaver, I have some very nice models of the muscle, and we'll look at a little bit of the other muscle tissues. I'll have a comparison of the muscle tissues for us to look at. Okay, I think that's it. Tessa, I'll send you an email, and we'll see how things go.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. All right, so I'll see you next week. So long, and I hope things go well. Send me an email if you have trouble with any link or the exam.